What is OOPS concept? So OOPS concept basically includes four things. First is inheritance, second is abstraction, third is polymorphism, and the fourth one is encapsulation. So inheritance is like, suppose I am using this mobile phone. So the basic, if I create a class or a means parent class of this, which is of like mobile class, and inside mobile class we had multiple subclasses like Apple, Samsung, then Huawei, Nokia. So all these subclasses will implement or inherit the properties of parent class. So if in mobile or in telephone class, if we had like call functionalities, then we had SMS functionalities, and then we extend that functionality to Apple class, or in Samsung class there we may had like other functionalities like play game. In Apple we may had like send iMessages. So all these are like inheritance. So apart from call and SMS, which will be there in Apple also, in Samsung also, since they are inheriting the properties from their parent class, that is the mobile class or the telephone class. That is what inheritance is. Abstraction is the property by virtue of which we only display the essential components or the essential functionalities of a class. Like suppose if I take this as a mobile, so instead of all the components like it has camera, it has power button, it has volume rockers, everything, instead of that we take it as a mobile and we use its functionality instead of knowing what is going inside or what is going behind the scene. So the third type is encapsulation. So in encapsulation, we will hide the data and expose it through some other method like setter or getter methods. As for example, suppose we had a customer class. Here we had like ID, password, age. So instead of directly changing like customer dot age equals to 35, 36 and ID equals to 5, we will use setter and getter method to set. Suppose in setter and getter method, we can manipulate the data like age should be greater than 40, password should contain special characters, numbers, alphabet, and it should be of length 12 digit or like 8 digit or 8 characters. So the fourth type is polymorphism. So polymorphism means like many behavior. So it can be a runtime polymorphism or a compile time polymorphism. So compile time polymorphism is mainly like a class changes its behavior while compiling using mainly constructor. And in runtime polymorphism, we will override the method or changing their behavior on the runtime. Explain with example. So for inheritance, we will mainly have a parent class and a subclass. Let's take an example of telephone class. Which will have dial number. So I'll keep it simple. So just print out. So instead of print out, here it will have all the business logic. And then telephone will have like mobile telephone and maybe of like old landline numbers or old landline telephone. I will implement only mobile and extend telephone. Here what we'll do is like mobile can send SMS. So I'll use public void send SMS, string message integer number. Sending message to number and then we had particular two types of mobile. let's say we had Apple, which can send iMessage, and we had Samsung, which can take 8K video. So no offense for anyone, I am a iOS user and an iPhone user for next 10 to 15 days maybe. So I already ordered Samsung S20 Plus and I am moving from iOS to Android because I don't like Apple phones. So in order to call them, we need to have user class, and here we will have public static void main, and we will create a Apple object, new Apple, and in Apple, so if we go and check Apple, it has only send iMessage, but it has implemented, it need to implement mobile object. So that's what inheritance is. It inherited the mobile specification or the properties of mobile, and mobile in turn has implemented all the properties of, or have all the properties of telephone. So let's see Apple dot, we can see send iMessage, and also we can use like send SMS, dial numbers. So if you check dial number 988, it goes straight to telephone. Similarly, we can add Samsung object, and create new Samsung, and Samsung dot take 8K videos, even Samsung dot send SMS. So we need to extend mobile class. We can see send SMS, hello world, to number 898, and if we run the application, we can see that sending iMessage, then dial number, taking 4K video or 8K video, sending message hello world to number 898. Don't dial this number, these are fake numbers. Now abstraction is like, here we had defined dial number, so this class can be an abstract class. So in order to make any class abstract, we need to first make it or define public abstract, then class name, and it will have an abstract method. So abstract may have 0 to 100% abstract methods, but an interface will always have 100% abstract method. So here we will have a public abstract method which returns void, and suppose we will take a vague example of like, does it support display or not? So has display, which takes a boolean display, and we'll let the subclass like mobile or landline to implement it. So it will throw error. I am using IntelliJ as an IDE, even Eclipse will also throw error. So implement method has display. So here we can see like we print out display, then the boolean value. So if we go to user, and in Samsung, if we just set it Samsung has display, we'll set it to true, and if we run the application, we can see the display true has been printed. So what does it means is like this part dial number, which is like Apple dial number, or like if we use Samsung dial number, so this part has been hidden from the subclasses, and the subclasses need to implement has display, which is an abstract method. This is what abstraction is. Now coming to encapsulation. So suppose we had Apple class, and in Apple we had different like screen size, then RAM. So I will take a common example of like string screen size, and I will make it private, and in integer we can just right click, generate get setter and getter method, and it will give me that get screen size and set screen size. So if you go to user object, I just delete all this to make it a little bit simpler. You can see Apple dot get screen size, and then we had set screen size. So here if you set it like 1080 cross 720, system.out apple dot get screen size, so we can access the screen size using this get screen size parameter, not directly through this screen size. But suppose in here, instead of defining it as a private, if we give it as a public, so in Samsung object, we can directly access the screen size. And we can set it as like full HD. So what encapsulation does it like? It hides the data from accessing from another class and exposes setter and getter method to set the value and to get the value. This is not encapsulation. Only Apple is encapsulated because the security is little bit better in iOS devices. So what polymorphism will do is like in Apple class we can override this has display method and implement or change the business logic or the behavior in the runtime. So we can have like display is true, and we can have other functionalities like display is full HD. And user, if we go and check apple dot has a display, and if we pass it true, and if we run the application, we can see that, okay, let me just comment it out and rerun it so that it makes it a little bit simpler. So we can see that the has display functionality has been changed in the runtime. But suppose I don't want to change it for Samsung. In that case, Samsung dot has display true. So we can see that the value of has display has changed on the runtime. Like Apple has changed its behavior and implemented its own logic in has display, whereas Samsung is using its parent class mobiles has display behavior because this is changed in runtime. What is overriding? So as already mentioned, overriding is changing the behavior at runtime. So we have checked what overriding is. So it is changing the value in the runtime or changing the behavior in the runtime. One more example is like if I create mobile, so we can see that has display function has changed its behavior in the runtime. Like when it is of type mobile, it has displayed full HD, and when it is of type simple mobile, it has only displayed true. What is overloading? Overloading is a concept or to change the behavior in compile time. It can be either a constructor or it can be another method also. So overloading can be implemented in two ways. Mainly we use overloading for overloading the constructor, but it can also be used for overloading any method also. Let's check. So we had a default constructor with 0 arguments, and if we want to overload it, we will pass two parameters like integer x comma integer y, or even like one parameter with one argument. So why the methods or the constructor has been overloaded? To specify some functionalities. Like in this case, we can initialize it with like so in the first case, what we can do is like we can initiate like string screen size, and we will initialize it as screen size equals to HD ready, and if it is of type X, or we'll change it to like string screen size, and we can initiate it with like screen size equals to screen size. So we can have multiple constructors, screen size, then we can have like physical power button, so all these are compile time polymorphism, which is also called overloading. So here in this case, what we will do is like we will create Samsung, new Samsung. So this one will create the base constructor, means it will have screen size of like HD ready, and suppose we want a screen size of full HD, so in that case, so we will pass full HD and it will land in this line 7, which is taking single argument. And suppose we want it to like full HD with physical button, and pass it like yes. So it will invoke this constructor, or it will give me a Samsung class with these properties. Similarly, we can overload the methods also. So we can use like Samsung dot take video. We can use like 3x zoom, or simply we can call without any functions. So this one will call line number 15, or the method with no arguments with 10x zoom, or with the zoom directly we can take it. So we can see the default constructor with 2 arguments, then we had created only one constructor, and that is actually happening in compile time. This is what overloading is. What is the main difference between overriding and overloading? Overriding is runtime polymorphism and overloading is compile time polymorphism. Overriding is also called dynamic binding, late binding, or late method dispatch, whereas overloading is called static binding or early binding. Overriding provides more flexibility, but it is slow in execution because it happens in the runtime, whereas overloading provides fast execution, but it has very less flexibility because it is already determined or already done in the compile time. What is compile time polymorphism versus runtime polymorphism? Overloading is a compile time polymorphism and overriding is a runtime polymorphism. So overriding gives more flexibility, like I can give if else statement and change the behavior, or what should I use, like in some case I should use mobile with display full HD or with display only like plain display VGA. So it is on the runtime I will be changing, and it makes a little bit slower. But on the other hand, overloading is in the compile time, but it has less flexibility, so I can't change the behavior of Samsung in the runtime. So it need to be fetched or it need to be set during the compile time only. Like I can have only screen size and power button. Suppose I need to use like face unlock or like in display fingerprint reader. So in that case, we won't be able to use overloading and change the behavior in compile time. This need to be done in the runtime. Can we overload a constructor? A constructor can be overloaded by implementing like multiple constructor in the same class. So a constructor is bound to a class, but a constructor cannot be overridden in a subclass, because overridden happens when a subclass or a child class implements the parent class, and there it overrides the base functionality of the parent class. But we can override the method in a subclass, but not a constructor. What is abstract class? So in order to make a class abstract, we need to put abstract keyword before the class, and it may or may not have an abstract method. So the main concept of abstract class is it cannot be initialized. Only the subclasses can initialize it, but it may have like constructors also. So we can define a constructor here like public even we can overload the constructor. But as I already mentioned, abstract class cannot be initialized. So if we try to initialize here, like telephone equals to so you can see that it throws compile time error because telephone is an abstract and cannot be initialized. So you may have a question like why we had then telephone constructor, how we will initialize it So in that case, the subclass can call the constructor using super keyword. So since we have overloaded the constructor, so the subclass is also throwing error. So here what we can do is like we can write public mobile, and in that we can call the constructor with some message. So an abstract class may or may not have an abstract method. Like we had here, one abstract method has display and it need to be extended by subclass, and its implementation will be done in the consequent subclasses or whoever is extending it. So abstract class can have non-abstract method too, like dial number, and it is not necessary for the subclasses to override it. So in that case, the functionality of dial number or like any business logic will be with telephone class, and has display will be implemented by its subclasses like mobile, Apple, Samsung, and any other subclasses. Can we initialize a abstract class? No, we can't initialize any abstract class. It will throw compile time error. Though what we can do is like we can write constructor in abstract classes, and this constructor will be called by subsequent child classes using super keyword. So in child class we will have mobile constructor, and inside constructor we can call super and pass the message. So it will invoke this abstract class constructor, but we can't initialize it using new keyword. What is interface? Interface is similar to an abstract class, but here we had 100% abstract method, and there can't be any method which has its body or which has its definition. So interface is similar to abstraction, but in that case we had 0 non-abstract method and 100% abstract methods. So we will create an interface using new Java class. Here we need to choose interface. Let me define as internet. So if we try to put any non-abstract methods in interface, it will throw compile time error. So you can see that interface abstract method cannot have body. So what you need to do is like we need to delete the method body. So it is like 100% abstract method. But here we will not tell this method as an abstract, rather it is implied that all the methods within interface is an abstract, and whichever subclasses will implement internet, so they need to override dial method and give their own functionality. And on the top of that, the main difference between interface and abstraction is, so we can't extend more than one abstract class. So here we had telephone. Suppose I want to extend another like Apple. So it's not possible. Cannot extend multiple classes, but I can implement multiple interface. Oops. So we can see that we are able to implement multiple interface, but not multiple abstract methods. That is the main difference between abstraction and interface. Does Java support multiple inheritance? No, Java doesn't support multiple inheritance because it will cause ambiguity. Now Java doesn't support multiple inheritance. How we will explain it is like, on the first hand, it can extend only one abstract class. So abstract class can have only concrete body, but interface cannot have any concrete body. So this is out of sync. Now we had only internet and web. So if I go to internet, here we had dial number. Oops. So we are implementing dial number. So you can ask that the dial number has been implemented from internet also and from web also. So it supports multiple inheritance, but no. So if you want to go to the parent interface, you just click it here, and here it will show that it is derived from internet and web. So either if you click it here, it defines the same thing actually. So if you see here, dial number, it returns void and it accepts an argument of type integer. Similarly, web also of type return type void and accepts an argument of type integer. So it doesn't matter because the functionality will be written in the subclass, not on the interface. And in case of extending, suppose we want to go to that parent class. So here we can see that it directly goes to telephone abstract class because we can extend only one abstract class. What is the return type of constructor? Constructor doesn't have any specific return type, but the return type of constructor is actually the class itself. But there will be no return statement. So if we try to return anything from constructor, like if we use any return statement, this is unnecessary at the last statement in the constructor. So you can see that the idea itself generates that this can be safely removed. And if we try to return like null, it will throw compile time exception. Or like return size, it will also throw compile time exception. Cannot return a value from a method with void result type. And if we define it as a string, that in that case it will be a method rather than an object. How we will define it? Let's go here. So this is the base or empty constructor. So if we try to call this empty constructor, there is no empty constructor available because it has turned to a method rather than a constructor. What is the difference between constructor and method? Constructor is basically used to initialize an object, whereas a method is basically used to expose a functionality of an object. A constructor doesn't return and never returns any value, but a method may or may not return a value. It may return void, or it may return some data type or a class type or an object type. The constructor name would be same as that of the class name, but it may have different signature value depending on how we have overloaded it. Like it may have one parameter or two parameter, or may not have any parameters in its argument, and by default a constructor is present. If we didn't explicitly define any constructor, by default a constructor will be defined in Java. But a method cannot be same name as that of a class. It should be different, and if it is not defined, it is not available. Constructor will not have any return type, but a method may or may not have any return type. The name of the constructor is same as that of the class name. And if a constructor is not defined, like in case of Apple, we don't have any constructor with name Apple. So a default constructor, which is a blank constructor, is already created by the JVM. What is static variable? So static variables belongs to the class and not to any object, and it is initialized only once at the start of the execution. So a static variable can be accessed directly by the class name and doesn't require any object. So it doesn't depend on how many objects that class has. It will be shared across, or the static variable will be shared across all the classes. So all the object of the classes will refer to the same instance of that static variable. So it will have only one memory allocation in the whole system. So static variables can be accessed or can be initialized without accessing the or without creating the object. Suppose say static, or we'll say public static string model, and suppose we need to access or we need to assign some value to it. Then what we can do is like, So we can't access it using any object. So mobile is an object of type Apple. So if we check like mobile dot model, so it is not available. So how we'll initialize it is like Apple dot model, and we can assign it's like iPhone 7. As I have iPhone 7, I'm giving it away. So if you want, just let me know in the comment section below. It's second hand. And even if we want to access this model from like instead of get screen size, suppose I am creating another like get model and return model. To make it simple, I will change this back to Apple. And here I will have Apple dot get model. So you can see that iPhone 7 is printed. So this is attached to the class level rather than to any object. But it is accessible from any other object. Suppose I create more Apple products or Apple object. So it will be referring to the same iPhone 7 memory location. So it is initialized only once when the class is loaded. So I will remove all this to make it little bit clear. So let's have a static method and a non-static method also. Get screen size. Remove it. So a non-static method can access both static and non-static variables. Like we can access model, similarly we can access screen size. But a static method cannot access non-static variables, like screen size is not accessible here. So if we try to put this, you can see it throws compile time exception that non-static field screen size cannot be referenced from a static context. Can we override a static variable? No, Java doesn't support overriding any static method. What it implies is like, though we can have in the subclass, so overriding is done in the subclass. So in the subclass we can define same method name which is of type static, and this will implement like a different behavior. So in that case what happens is like it's just hiding the functionality of its parent class, but it is not in actual sense what override means. What is static block? So static blocks in Java actually executes before the constructor, and it is specifically used to initialize any other static variables. The static block is executed only once, the first time when we create an object of the class, or the first time when you try to access the static members of that class. Similarly, we had static block also. So what static block does is like static, here we had like system.out inside static block, and even we can have the constructor to make it more clear. So this static block will run before the constructor. Let me put it after the constructor so that it becomes clear. So we can see that inside static block ran first, then in telephone constructor, sorry, it went to the superclass. If we remove this and rerun it, So you can see inside static block ran first and then inside Apple constructor. So what we can do is, like in static block we can initialize all the other static variables we will have, like we had static dot models and all. So we can initialize it in this static block. So this will be called before the constructor has been invoked or before accessing even the static variables. So we have called message first, then we are creating the object using that constructor Apple. So let me debug it and check where it hits. So you can see that this is being ran first and then our message. So if you see in the static block, message is actually null. Even if you hover over it, you can see that message is not yet assigned. But here we had already assigned it, so it will run after the static block. So if we release it, we can see that it came to apple.message. Then it goes for object creation and then it will call the constructor inside Apple constructor. So first static block runs, then the static variables are initialized, and then the class has been initialized using the constructor. Can you execute a program without main method? Yes, we can execute a program without main method, but that is supported till Java 1.6. From Java 1.7, without main method, a program cannot execute. So let me take this static block out and put it here. What I will do is, like, I will comment it and try to. So once we run it, we can see that the main method is not found in class user. Please define the main method as public static void main. So Java runs without main method till JVM 1.6. So you can see that the static block ran first and then this main method ran. Because main method is also static, but this one is static block. So static block will be always running first, then the main method or the public static void main. What is super in Java? In short, super means parent class. So super is mainly used to call the constructor of the parent class or to invoke the method or variables of the parent class. So using the super keyword, we can access the constructor of the parent class. So before that, we need to extend it. And we can call super. So it will invoke the constructor of the parent class. And I'll just remove all this. And using super dot dial number, we can access any other method of parent class. So if we go to dial number, okay, it went to super parent class. It's grandfather. We just so we can see that we can access the method using super keyword. Even we can send SMS also. And it should take a string. Hello world. Oops, what it is expecting. okay, and an integer of number. Or suppose we want to access some variables like number. In that case also we will be using super dot number, and we can assign some value. What is the difference between super and this? This refer to the current class, whereas super refer to its parent class. And if we return this at the end of any method, so it will return the instance of that class. And this can also be used to invoke the constructor of the current class. And this can also be passed as a signature used to access the or even in the constructor class. So suppose we had here public string model. So either we can use model or we can use this dot model and equals to like iPhone 8. So why we need to use this, or why can't we directly use model? Suppose I am passing here another variable, suppose string with model, and I need to assign this model to this model. So in that case what I will do is like I will assign it here model. So if I click here, it refers to this model, which will be an argument to iMessage, and this model will be belonging to this class. Even we can return this, and it would be of type Apple. So return this means it will return object of Apple class. Even we can pass, instead of string we can pass like Apple, and in Apple we can remove this, and suppose I am calling it recursively, so in that case I can pass this to this argument. So you can see that since this is of type Apple, so it is expecting Apple. A apple a day keeps a doctor away. Can you use super and this both in constructor? No, we can't use both the keywords in the constructor because both super and this should be the first statement inside a constructor, and we can't have both of them together. So either we need to give this or we need to write first super. We can't have both because this need to be the first statement. If I use it here, it will throw me compile time exception. Similarly, if I use this, it will throw me compile time exception. And if I move it in the first line, okay, this is recursive constructor. I will create another constructor. So here we can see that we are able to call the base constructor using this, but if I use super, it will throw me exception because it must be the first statement in a constructor body. So this and super can't go hand on hand. What will be the output of this program? I will leave this unanswered. You can answer me in the comment section below. What is final? So final keyword is basically used to restrict the user. It can be used with a variable or with a class or even with a method. If we use it with a variable, in that case we can't alter or change the variable value. What if we declare a method as final? If we declare a method as a final, in that case we can't override the method in its subclasses. So the final method cannot be extended. So we have seen that mobile has been extended by Apple. So I'll remove this, and here I'll implement So I have overridden the behavior of send SMS in my Apple class. So if I go to the base class or the parent class, here we can see that it is not abstract. So if I declare it as an abstract, so this is not final. So if I declare it as a final, so what will happen is like in Apple class we can see that it is throwing error. So send SMS cannot override send SMS not string because overridden method is final. So final means it is concrete, it is already done here. No one can override it. Can you declare a class as final? So in that case, we can't extend the final class. And suppose I am making this class as a final. So in that case, what will happen is like we can't extend that file. Cannot inherit the final mobile. Leave about this. This is gone. Even we can't extend mobile class because this class is of type final. What is final blank variable? Final blank variable is similar to final variable. In that case, it will be initialized only once and cannot be modified or altered thereafter. Suppose I go to Apple, and by final, what do you mean? Like here we had model, and we can assign it like iPhone SE. So suppose in this iMessage I am trying to override it or change the value of model to iPhone 11. So it will throw me an error. Cannot assign a value to the final variable because it is already done. Final means this is a final statement. There is nothing, no one can change it, no one can override it. But final blank means it can be overridden once. But this can't be initialized in any method. It need to be initialized in the constructor. So this is what final blank variable is. It can be blank at the beginning, but it need to be initialized at the constructor level. Can an abstract method be final? No, an abstract class cannot be final. It will throw compile time error. So if we declare anything abstract, so it means like the subclasses will extend it and initialize and make the method or the class as concrete. Whereas final means it is already concrete. So if we declare anything as final, so we can't extend it. Neither we can extend a class or neither we can override a method. So in that case, final with abstract means like I have already created a concrete method or a concrete class and I will not be extending it, which contradicts with the method abstract. So making a abstract class final or an abstract method as final will throw compile time error. Illegal combination of modifier final and abstract, so we can't compile it. And please don't forget to subscribe to CodeSpace. We hack together.